So before I get started with this, I just want to say thank you all so much for 100 subscribers. And starting today, we are changing the whole consistency thing. So I'm going to try to be a lot more consistent. And to start off, we're only going to upload once a week, every Wednesday at 3 o'clock. But as soon as I come to terms with the uploading thing again, we can start moving it up to 2 times a week, 3 times a week, and back to where we were originally. So I just wanted to say thank you and let's go. So, Mysterio, 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 Mysterio. I've no idea how many times I was doing this for. I wasn't counting. Mysterio, 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 Zero, Mysterio, 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 Mysterio. I'm going insane now. I'm just staring at myself. I'm like, what the fuck is happening? Mysterio, 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 Mystermatologist. Mysterio, 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 Mysterio. I can't speak anymore. Mysterio, 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 Mysterio. That's about 10 minutes. I don't actually know how many times I said Mysterio. Hopefully I said 100 times. Come on, tell me at least somebody was counting, surely. I know I wasn't. I probably should have been counting, but I wasn't. I think I'll just count. I think I'll just count as I'm rewatching while I'm editing. Because I need to figure out if I actually said Mysterio 100 times or not. Because I've been saying it for about 10 minutes now. I better have said it 100 times or else I'm going to cry. No, I won't cry, but you get the point. Stereo.